Welcome, everybody. So glad to be gathering this group. Joseph, thank you for joining me, and Bia, such an honor to have you join this conversation as we discuss the Indigenous Reciprocity Initiative, of course, part of the Chacruna organization. And I am so personally interested in how we as a community can help cultivate conversation in the psychedelic space about what you do. And there's so much to be learned. There are so many blind spots. So it's an honor to have you both on this this webinar, and hopefully as our audience gathers, we can cultivate a very interesting dialogue that may lead to new awarenesses. And with that, I'll allow you both to introduce yourself if now's the time, and Alan or Lisa, let me know if you would like to mention anything beforehand.
Okay, I'll jump in. Thanks, Dave. Dave. Hello, everybody. Greetings from the Bay Area, Ohlone territory. My name is Bia Labate, and I'm Chacruna's Executive Director and co-founder. It's a pleasure to be here today talking about Indigenous Reciprocity. I want to note that this company has chosen the name Maya Health, which is interesting. If you think about one of the main points that we want to signal to the psychedelic field is that we are really building on the shoulders of giants that came before us, which are Indigenous people. And we didn't invent the wheel, and we didn't discover everything. And even if Indigenous people, even if some of us are interested only in synthetics, not me, but others, even if you're only interested in synthetics and synthetic psilocybin or MDMA or LSD, you're still heir to Indigenous people. A lot of the concepts that guide the psychedelic healing and psychedelic assisted therapy and psychedelic science are direct legacies from Indigenous people. We just finished this event yesterday in Mexico, a psilocybin panel, a psilocybin conference on therapeutic aspects, culture, and decolonization. And we started that panel talking about how Mexico as a society and a civilization was built with psychedelics. Like the main Indigenous groups that are part of history of Mexico have used a plethora of substances, and that is very not very recognized in the Mexican national identity. And there has been a lot of denial of the Indigenous roots of this civilization, but also of just being Indigenous in general. There has been a lot of attempts throughout South America to clean or wipe out our Indigenous heritage, made a result of colonialism and shame and attempts to, to make people more brown, become more white. And so we're trying to reclaim this origins of the psychedelic movement, and the Indigenous Reciprocity Initiative is based on this idea of giving back. Chacruna is a nonprofit organization. We are mainly providing public education around psychedelic plant medicines, and we aim to create this bridge between traditional uses, ceremony, ritual, religion, Indigenous people, the global South, and psychedelic assisted therapy, psychedelic science, and these new kinds of urban and contemporary phenomena. And we're also focused on platforming Indigenous people, people of color in general, Black people, minorities, women, queer people, people from the global South. I am Brazilian and I'm queer and I'm a woman. I'm the leader of Chacruna. We're trying to celebrate these voices. People of color are the stars of our conferences and our initiatives. And I want to thank all of you for being here today, and Maya for organizing this. And Maya has also supported us with general donations on different fronts, like a designer and other things, that we appreciate the in-kind support that this organization has provided, and offer back our ties of friendship and expecting this continued relationship to grow. Also want to just remind here the memory of a vet that recently passed away, Matt Call, tragically. He was my friend. He suffered from PTSD. He used psychedelics to heal, and he passed away in a recently, and he had participated in our conferences. And so I'm very touched. I learned about this today. I wanted to just remind his memory, and I am done with my introduction. Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, if you don't mind me sharing, Matthew Kill was also somebody I knew, and his passing is news to me at this moment. So I might ask, before we transition to a warm welcome to Joseph, if we take a few moments in silence as a group and with everyone on this call to honor Matt.
So sorry you had to hear it like that. And okay.
Thank you. Okay. We are indeed working with a very potent and powerful topic, a concept, an aspect of human psychology, an aspect of the human biological relationship with the world, with naturally occurring entheogens, medicines, the pharmacopoeia that's out there, and just the human journey itself is an incredibly complex concept that unfortunately leads to outcomes like this. And I don't know any details of Matt's passing, so I won't say more, but I have full honor for the journey that he was on and the impact that he made in this community. So thank you for sharing that. And with that, I will bring our attention to Joseph. Joseph, thank you for joining us, and I'd love if you would share a few words about yourself. And I know you joined via, was it April or so this year, and officially began the Indigenous Reciprocity Initiative roughly in June. So we're in a fairly nascent time for your project and for your collaboration with Bia. I would love if maybe you can share a little about what drew you to join forces with Bia and be working together in this way.
Thank you so much, David, and thank you, Bia. It's always good to see you, even when it's only through Zoom. First met Bia at London's Breaking in 2019. I was giving a talk there entitled Visionary Plants and Thinking Forests, looking at human environment relationships in the Amazon, but also just the relationship between ontology, or the view of reality that you're culturally conditioned to have, and then how that affects approaches to conservation, to the use of plant medicines. And I was in the middle of finishing my dissertation, master's science in ethnobotany, and my dissertation supervisor, Daniela Peluso, who has spent decades working in Amazonia, and who I much wisdom from, and hopefully I'm learning how to practice it. She's a friend of Bia, and she's on the board of directors for Chacruna. So she kind of facilitated that introduction, and I first encountered Bia's warrior spirit at the Breaking Convention. And then I volunteered for Chacruna a couple months later at Horizons in New York City. And after that, we just stayed connected, and eventually Bia approached me with the idea of developing a proposal for what would eventually become the Indigenous Reciprocity Initiative of the Americas, which we call IRI for short. And that's when it So that was the summer of 2020. And that's when I started developing that proposal, and we began building all the relationships that are contained within Erie over the course of that year, leading up to April of this year, 2021, when we officially launched Erie at the Sacred Plants in the Americas conference. And that was kind of like the soft launch. And in this past June and August, June, July, and August, we worked on a new website, and we were able to disperse the first round of funding to the 20 organizations that are participating, the different Indigenous community initiatives in Erie. And so we raised just under 60,000 in the first 3 months, and we're hoping to grow from there and keep growing. And yeah, I just started my full-time position as program director of Erie in June. So here I am, grateful to be here.
Congratulations. Beautiful. And you've chosen 20 Indigenous communities to direct the resources and the philanthropic dollars or energy that are being gathered by this initiative. I don't want to borrow from anything that you're about to share. So Joseph, for the audience, will be sharing a brief presentation of the initiative. But if it's not premature, I'd love to ask, what is the process that your team has designed in order to find those communities? I can imagine that there are so many to, if I could find a better word, but select from, you know, and to develop relationships with and to learn from, and to be able to understand how this initiative can really play a part in, and I won't say more because it's not my place to say more. So maybe I'll let that ellipses hand it over to what exactly the initiative helps the Northern, as I've heard you call it, or Western world to play a part in with regards to the lived experience of these Indigenous communities that you are currently working with.
Thank you, David. All good questions. It'll all organically, just as Erie did, kind of grew organically, sort of like a mycelial network. I think there was some self-selection involved because there was there were certain limitations that we had to work within that resulted in those 20 organizations. And it started with my own work. I was able to make some connections while working in Ecuador as well as in Peru. And when I was working at Kew Gardens, someone named Nick Ovenden who began an initiative in partnership with the Shuar and the Quechua and the Secopai in Ecuador, and that organization is called Yakum, which is the Shuar word for howler monkey, and that's one of the indigenous-led organizations that we're working with in Erie. And then I also worked in a community called Sachopen, which is in central Peru. It's a Yanesha indigenous community. That's where I did my field work. And that community started a nonprofit called the 7 Elements, which is primarily produces organic coffee, but they also have an apiary, which is managed by the women in the community, producing honey for antibiotic medicine, and as well as food and another revenue stream. Their story, kind of where I intersected with it, was a few after they were incorporated into a biosphere reserve, and now they're being opened up to this eco-cultural tourism economy and trying to navigate that. And throughout my work, I just have found that that what seems to be one of the most impactful ways to support environmental conservation and cultural conservation is to support Indigenous autonomy and agency in whatever way that I can. And so the network is guided by that principle of biocultural conservation. And from those two kind of starting points, it was just the organic growth of the network and trying to get a broad distribution of different communities and environments throughout the Americas. So we have some organizations in the United States, in Mexico, Costa Rica, Colombia, Brazil, Ecuador, and Peru. And we couldn't cover everything, and there also had to be some level of organization already, and in order to receive the support and the funding. And so with those limits, it kind of just grew into this number of 20 that we ended with. It's really just whoever was open to the partnership, but also whose work on the ground is grassroots and indigenous led, and some with the philosophy and the kind of goal of Erie. And so it was kind of organic, and I think we landed on a pretty balanced sort of sample. But
Can I jump in here, or should I wait for the end?
go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, just wanted to say that one of the main criteria is that it had a group of people involved, and it was not just one person. Not because we are against, the solo flight shaman that has his like business to go out and travel, but those frequently are already kind of more taken care of. Those leaders that have a lot of access to traveling abroad. And so we also wanted to honor indigenous organizations that have history and people on the field. And the other criteria was not to choose just psychedelic using groups, because there is this kind of fetish around, if indigenous people use psychedelics, then we like them. And if they don't use, we don't like them. Or we like the most that are the substances that we most like ayahuasca or peyote. But if it's tobacco, nobody cares. Or if it's other substances, even less. So that was, these were two of the criterias. And also the other one is to cut the traditional intermediary that are people that are frequently based in Latin America, whose job is to offer indigenous people for North Americans, Canadians, be this kind of broker, but that frequently is not connected to any kind of community, and circulates a lot in maybe, the UN or Horizons, MAPS, big conferences, but doesn't really, is brought by this kind of intermediary, but then these people don't have ties in the community. And the other is big organizations that already give to certain groups. So there's a whole bureaucracy of nonprofits in the global north that favor certain groups, and not all of them are very well chosen, or not always they know the people, or they have connections in the ground. I'm not saying that it's always like that. There's a lot of really legit and good work, but there's also just cases where, between the intention and what happens down the line is like this series of steps that gets lost in the end towards where the money arrives.
Yeah, and I'll just add a little bit more about the criteria. We wanted to focus on small scale grassroots organizations that target a specific group of local communities. These projects are all operated by members of the indigenous communities being supported. They're all locally designed, and most importantly, they're implemented to address self-determined needs and priorities. They're not driven by metric or deliverable that's being imposed by a larger organization, by an NGO or nonprofit. The majority of them are dealing directly with one specific indigenous group. The majority are also indigenous women-led, and focus on women's issues. And like Bia said, it's not only related to psychedelic plants, but also food security, water security, land tenure, land rights struggles, whatever the community has determined is their priority at the time. And it's guided and led by their kind of community consensus. and they're all meant to be multidimensional and aimed at resilience and autonomy and long-term sustainable change and support. So not short-term efforts or kind of faster time scales, although it is addressing urgent needs. Those are determined by the people on the ground, and it's just been over the past year, those relationships, and they're the ones that ended up remaining and being part of the final iteration of IRRI for this year.
Thank you. There was a lot to wrap your arms around there between the two of you, and I feel more clear in how your organization is structuring to make these decisions, and some of the nuances that you have to grapple with, I'm sure, are very complex and require a degree of sensitivity that is something I hope our audience and everyone who knows about your work can really honor. It's sort of the quiet, humble work that you're doing that I think may take some time. As you said, Joseph, you know, it's not about these quick wins or the fast-paced investor metrics or donor metrics that might sometimes be looked for. And there's something very humble and noble in that. So thank you for sharing how you're going about this work. Would this be a good time for me to hand over to you and for you to share a brief presentation of everything that the Indigenous Reciprocity Initiative is up to? Yeah.
Sure, yeah, this is a good time. I think I'll just do a short presentation, and then I think I want to open it up to the audience and you know, continue having this conversation that we're having now. I think it's a good way to showcase.
Agreed. Yes, so before you begin, I'll remind the audience and share again that this is a fundraiser for IRRI, and we've already raised $500 just on this call, which is a wonderful start. And thank you so much, everyone who's contributing to the cause and it sounds like engaged with what Bia and Joseph are sharing so far. Please take this opportunity to ping a friend who's that one person who's involved in the psychedelic space or in some way might have a curiosity about Indigenous reciprocity concepts and nuances, and know that this is a very powerful container with two of the figures in the space who are really putting some of the most thought into that topic as we all become global citizens and connect with roots and with ancestral wisdom and with plant medicines in countries maybe outside of where we live. There's an invitation here to open awareness to how we can do that in a respectful way and with as few blind spots as possible. So to the audience, please invite somebody who you feel might be interested in this conversation as Joseph's about to get started. And with that, I'll hand over to you, and perhaps Bia and I can go off of camera to leave the spotlight on Joseph. And then we'll be returning for time for questions after Joseph shares, and if anyone in the audience would like to ask a question, please feel free to post that in the threads so Lisa can be gathering those, or you're welcome to chime in at the end. Thank you.
Is that showing up for everyone? Bia, do you see this?
Yeah, but
Slides.
maybe you can do it in the presenter's mode so we don't see the margin ones.
Oh, yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Support Bia, David for introducing, and I'll just say a little bit more about myself. My name is Joseph Mays, and I am the program director for the Indigenous Reciprocity Initiative, or IRRI for short. I've been doing ethnographic work, ecological work for about a decade now, and these two pursuits I've come to see over the years are really one and the same. So biological and cultural conservation inextricably, and that is sort of the spirit in which Erie has been designed and implemented, and that's what I'm trying to bring in my work with Chacruna. And I just have some words and phrases on the screen here, just to sort of let those float around in your minds while I talk a little bit about my own story and how that leads into the story behind Erie and what Erie is. So let me just double check. I think I've got the wrong slides up. So let me just, and then I just want to thank everyone again for being here and dedicating a little bit of time and attention to this, because it's really close to my heart, and I think is dealing with a lot of issues that will be resonating hopefully for everyone else. So this is just a quick, well, let me back up first. So the Indigenous Reciprocity Initiative, just to give a brief summary, is a resource that connects people directly with grassroots Indigenous organizations. So goal is to promote community-led projects that address everything from community food security, as well as seed conservation, environmental health, land rights issues, economic and educational support, reforestation and agroforestry, and the thread that connects all these are all self-determined by local people. So in some cases they are reforesting or creating nurseries for plant medicine, for medicine plants that maybe have seen a decline in correlation with the increase in psychedelic plant tourism in global South. And so in some communities are needing to replenish their own sources of those plants that are now so valuable as commodities. But not every organization is directly involved with psychedelic plants. As Bia kind of alluded to at the beginning, we didn't want to create a situation where it was only those groups or those communities that are already known to the psychedelic space, that are maybe somewhat more glamorous or more attractive to Westerners or people from the global North. Wanted to make it inclusive of groups that have been cut off from their plant lineage for various reasons, or maybe are not as well known and are involved in doing things that are very important, but the importance of those projects maybe aren't well understood by the wider audience yet. So hopefully this, hopefully Erie is one way that those topics are illuminated in the public, and can bring some more support to them. So one of the groups that I mentioned at the beginning, Yakum, they just began reforesting this pasture land right here. This is like, I think 5 hectares. And this is like a picture that I was just sent last week of the nursery with all the different trees that they germinate in these little bags. And then once they've germinated into seedlings, then they start to plant those, and everybody involved in choosing which species to focus on. They're also in a community mapping project, so that they map their territory and they determine where they want to reforestation efforts, where they have resources that need protection, so that they have more autonomy, more control over their territory and over their resources. So just wanted to shout out Yakum and just give a little example of what's going on with Erie. Much of the philosophy behind this program really stems from this exploration of cultural conditioning and how religious and cosmological beliefs and concepts about reality, which can kind of fall under this umbrella of ontology, those are what underlie many of the supposedly secular and objective approaches to science, to conservation, that we all unconsciously operate under. And those influence psychedelic science, psychedelic therapy, all of those sort of unmentioned assumptions that maybe we can't even see because of the limits of our point of view. So that's something that psychedelics has influenced me in just recognizing my own perspective, and then understanding that every single individual has a unique perspective, and that also includes different communities, different territories and areas. They all have their own story, their own perspective to learn from. And you know, if you never step outside of the story that you're in, then maybe you'll never realize that there's an alternative to the ontology that you've been handed. So this is the kind of thing that guided me to where I am today, and I hope that just sharing a little bit about that maybe will prompt something in your minds, and maybe in my own mind. So this is also for me to remember and to reaffirm and question. So I really encourage everyone to ask questions as well, so that at the end I can be challenged and we can open the conversation up. So, like saying, those ontological perspectives that we maybe don't question, they influence our attitudes and our behaviors, as well as the efficacy of our attempts to address ecological crises. So that's what we're all here to sort of address, and those ecological crises are reflections of the crises that are going on in our own hearts and our own spirits. And so it's all connected, and I wanted to just sort of briefly talk about some Western ontologies, some those that come from Amazon, that inform a different relationship with nature that is possible. So I'll just start off just the ecology, which is what we get ecological relationships from, is this word that comes from the Greek word oikos, which means house or home. And it's the study of the relationships between living organisms. And before we can address ecological crises, we have to understand those relationships and then orient ourselves within that network of relationships. So that, in other words, we have to understand the story that we're in. And that is what ethnography is about, or ethnobotany, which is what I see, the relationship between people and plants. In many ways, that is about the story that we believe about ourselves, about each other, and it's what gives us our orientation and our identity in life and in the world. So, you know, the story that many of us are familiar with, that we're all separate selves, accidentally ended up here, and the world has no meaning, that we're just colliding in deterministic patterns. We're all isolated individual consciousnesses that are just an accident of interactions between different tissues and organs. This is not necessarily a scientific point of view. It's more of a cultural story, and it's not sustainable either. And it's actually something that can be challenged by evidence. So my research brought me into contact with those alternatives to that hegemonic point of view, and I interacted with people like Don Ricardo, who's pictured on screen here. I took this photo during, I think, our second interview, but he's an Indigenous Yanesha elder in the community of Sachopen, which I briefly mentioned earlier, in central Peru. He was one of my great friends and key informants during my fieldwork, and you know, his family was very kind to me. They kind of teach me other story that we're invited to enter, where life is always communicating with us, and our well-being is intimately connected to that of every other human being, every other organism and organ of the planet. And he sadly passed away in April when we were just launching the initiative. So I like to, whenever I'm speaking about Erie, just dedicate it to Don Ricardo, and maybe open with a little story of my first interview with him. But I think I just want to reiterate that this is really about what we can learn from Indigenous stories and stories of relationship that are so different from this story of alienation that we may are more familiar with, and just asking, what is that story of alienation? And to answer that, that question and the answer to it is what determines the nature of all of our relationships, and reciprocity, which is central to the Indigenous Reciprocity Initiative, is something that can only take place within a system of relationship between beings who recognize each other as subjects with agency, and how we see one another as well as other organisms, the trees in the forest, and fungi and animals and rivers, and even organic compounds. It makes all the difference, as well as how we think of what they see and how they see us. So this is just an anecdote that really struck when I first read it in this book, How Forests Think, by Eduardo Kohn. He's an anthropologist who works with the Avila Runa in the Ecuadorian Amazon, Quechua speaking group, and a lot of his ideas have ended up being put into practice. Like he helped indigenous activists introduce the rights of nature into the Ecuadorian Constitution, as well as into some UN resolutions. And in his book, he tells the story of camping on a hunting party, and his friends told him to sleep face up, because if a jaguar happens upon you, a were-jaguar, while you're asleep, if you're facing them, then they'll recognize you as a person just like them, and they won't eat you. So the story kind of just it's challenges this nature culture divide that we might take for granted, that is dominant in the sort of global culture of the global north, at least. That dominant ontology, or that story, if we challenge it, then we're forced to recognize the fact that seeing and representing and knowing and thinking are not exclusive to humans. And this is part of an approach of decolonization. So trying to decolonize your mind and really question those concepts that might be taken for granted. And it really points to this connection between our relationship to nature and the world, and then how it relates to ideas of conservation. So that's where the perspective shifting value of psychedelics, of visionary experiences, and the stories, the ontologies informed by those that we find in many indigenous contexts, that question that nature culture dichotomy and treat it as a network of subjects, of selves with agency, with whom we all relate. So just like in that story of the jaguar, there are many different ontologies in indigenous cultures, especially in the Amazon, but not exclusively there, that view all living beings as persons, as subjects, just like ourselves. So the vulture would see the maggots in a rotting carcass as the same way that we would see salmon swimming in, or peccaries at their salt lick are having a community feast. And even the forest itself is a thinking being with, communicating, and there's a network of different beings with their own thoughts. We're in constant communication if we're present and connected to our environment. So that same Western scientific perspective, which is now reaping the benefits of ethnopharmacological discoveries generated by indigenous people. At the same time, it also dismisses that indigenous perspective as unscientific. So this contradiction is partly be blamed for the degradation of forests and communities by those same forces that now profit from indigenous ecological knowledge and pharmaceutical knowledge. So, leaving behind that nature culture dichotomy and engaging with a story that views forests as living, thinking networks, and all beings as subjects with their own minds and agency, is a psychedelic point of view, and it's one that strengthens indigenous autonomy as well as ensures the protection of valuable resources of biocultural diversity and ecological knowledge. So it allows the seeds of reciprocity to take root. So I just read an article today in Manga Bay about how plant knowledge, about 75% of medicinal plant knowledge is exclusively contained within one indigenous language. So if that language disappears, all of that knowledge disappears as well. That's part of biocultural conservation. So the idea that ethnic diversity and cultural diversity is the same as biological diversity, or if you look at a map of the world, see regions with multiple ethnic or multiple language groups or culture groups, that's where there's also the highest biodiversity. And so this kind of approach of conservation that we might be familiar with in the national park system or in kind of reserves and preserves that push people off of the land, it's really maybe misguided, and maybe we need to consider that, because the truth is that indigenous managed land, more carbon stored and more biodiversity than protected areas. So community owned forests, indigenous managed lands, they seem to be healthier ecologically. And I certainly could see that in my own work. This is a picture, another picture of Don Ricardo, where he invited me to his office once, which just this patch of dirt next to his herb garden, his chili pepper field, stand of avocado trees, and tall oak moss. And this was what he called his area. And he was always teasing me, saying he would charge 100 soles per hour for interviews. But the truth is that he asked for money and never indicated that that was the nature of our relationship. Many people have that idea in the city, in Lima, or different areas where people talk about indigenous groups and they say they're all just going to ask you for money, or they dismiss them in a way. And this has never been the case for me. And the truth is that the people that I work with in Erie are just looking for ways to be self-sustaining, to be autonomous, and to have just more agency over their own destiny and their own futures. And at one point when we were in conversation, Ricardo all of a sudden stopped and pointed out this chorus of birds, of little parrot species that singing in the branches above us. And he said, listen to the little parrots. It's not always like this. It's not so common, and it means that this is a good moment. So this reminds me of another story I learned from Troy, from SIA, another organization involved in Erie. This is a Comanche organization involved in eagle and raptor bird conservation. The feathers are very important to indigenous ceremonies throughout North America. They're also involved in peyote conservation. And he told me whenever a bird flies past you is a blessing, according to Comanche belief. And so think about how many times a day a bird flies past you. You might be more blessed than you realize. But in his 70s, Ricardo probably remembers when that bird song was more common. But over the decades, he lived through deforestation of the valley, just persecution from Franciscan missionaries, displacement by colonos, and he still welcomed me to his home and he was still harvesting coffee in his garden or in his office. He was always listening to that network of interrelationship, and always in communication. So this is just a little more background. This highlighted area is the Pasco region in Peru, and it sits kind of right between the foothills of the Andes Mountains and then the edge of the Amazon basin. So just Sachopen, where those photos are from, is about 7 kilometers from the closest town, and it's right where the edge of the mountains and the rainforest meet. And it was kind of that liminal space where this began. And I just really think that meeting place kind of illustrates something for me about the way that networks behave, and just the way that we observe those communications in the soil through the fungal networks and the root networks, but also between human communities and between the global north and the global south. I think all of these concepts, sort of the borders between them are variable, especially when we're influenced by plants and language. For example, the Yanesha, they have some markers of the Quechua language, as well as some from the lowland Amazon. But the Quechua language is where we get the word Chacruna for Psychotria viridis, the DMT containing plants within the ayahuasca brew, and then ayahuasca is also Quechua for the Banisteriopsis cali vine. And they are also closely linked to the Arawak language family. That's where we get hammock and tobacco, and that's what was spoken in Haiti at the time of Columbus invasion. And yeah, I have lived in this area. This photo I took of the Chorobamba River Valley for at least several thousand years, and this is an area that was once a crossroads between the Incan Empire, or sorry, the Inca Empire and the rainforest. And when the missionaries arrived, they said it was intractable and there were no paths. But of course, many years later, we discovered that there were well-traveled paths, and in fact, this was a very lively trade route, and always has been. And you know, these in this area, they're navigating the implications of the biosphere reserve that now encompasses their territory, the growing tourist presence, and then the convergence of different global and local economies, the forces of cultural and ecological erosion, this sort of demand for traditional appearance, for authentic indigenous experience, and then this local desire of the community to recover foods and revitalize the customs of their ancestors, their knowledge, and even the psychedelic renaissance touching them. So they're very aware of the increase in tourism, people seeking ayahuasca, and just like Ricardo, many people in the community are growing medicinal plants in their gardens, and this is his son-in-law Eduardo, or Edu, who was another close friend of mine. He started nurseries for lost varieties of foods and medicine species, and he also leads traditional dances. And one of the most popular is all about ayahuasca, the entheogenic brew. And this is despite the fact that they don't have an ayahuasca, and they don't drink ayahuasca in Sachopen. They don't have curanderos or shamans, but they still have this story, this song of a time when the Yanesh were sick and dying, and they had to take ayahuasca to be transformed into a giant snake and be cured. And when they perform, everyone is very enthusiastic and sings all the words, despite many people not understanding the Yanesha language. And you know, Eduardo is very aware of the tourists coming to the Amazon he gave me recommendations for where to go, but he also warned me that you shouldn't take ayahuasca to see visions, that will only cause death or madness, that you should only take it as medicine. And you know, I still remember the first time I saw them performing the dance, and it was sort of hypnotizing in a way. Tempted to just sort of go into a trance, but Eduardo called me right back in with some clapping and invited me to join and participate. And that's kind of where I crossed the boundary between alienation and then relationship. So this decision to act and to participate into this community is something that I think we're all being invited to do in a way. And so this is a photo of ayahuasca, of two of the most common ingredients, Psychotria viridis, and then that's Chacruna, and then the vine, ayahuasca, Bembereopsis. And it's, you know, the two ingredients are still recognized, and although the community that I worked with are mostly Christian nominally, they still use the Yanesha words for deities and for sacred places. And the influence of ayahuasca, of the ontology influenced by those visionary experiences is still very present. And that is that difference that I've been hinting at, just the idea of ontology as a view of reality, where a cultural perspective that expresses all of our relationships, ecological, social, environmental, and within society. And it's really a difference in worlds, not just views. So it's not like a belief system on a intellectual level, but it's deep, and it's what you actually feel about everything around you. So
Joseph,
I think,
thank
oh,
you.
sorry, David.
Well, you've brought up a topic that I think is a great segue for us to potentially invite the audience into questions, and this Aini concept, which refers to the reciprocity definition, if you will. So the Quechua form for reciprocity refers to a society existing in a constant state of flux, perpetually reordering and correcting for the dynamic imbalance of every living moment in pursuit of collective well-being. Beautiful definition. Since you were alluding to that topic, I wondered if I could jump in and ask you to elaborate on this concept and this definition of Aini. And then with that, perhaps you can ask a question to the audience to help invite in a conversation.
Sure. Yeah, I would ask the audience what do they think of when they hear the word reciprocity, because I know it's becoming somewhat of a buzzword. And thank you for that very smooth segue, and I appreciate it. I know I was getting rather long-winded, perhaps. So Aini, I first encountered the concept of reciprocity many years ago when I was an undergrad, and it was in the context of cultural groups, and that concept of Aini, just as you said, that society existing in a constant state of flux. So it's not just quid pro quo or like give and take just on the most basic level, but it really it's something that I think is vaguely defined. Maybe it's paid lip service by different corporate entities, by conferences, by people who maybe are speaking in the psychedelic space. And I think it's something that we should all consider deeply, what that means to us. So I believe that the original intent of Aini is something that maybe doesn't fit neatly into the models of like access and benefit sharing, for example, of intellectual property, where maybe people in the global north who are investing in psychedelic businesses or building companies using psychedelic plants might be to draw on this sort of colonial model of access and benefit sharing, which is historically how people have sort of decided we're going to confer the benefits of the profits in our society to indigenous communities. So it requires delineating which indigenous group is the owner of this knowledge, and then the profits, some percentage would be generated and given back. And that comes from the Convention of Biological Diversity and the Nagoya Protocols, which was ratified in 1990 or 92. But if you look at the history of all the projects that have tried to implement that language since it's really succeeded and confer those benefits to the communities. And I think the issue of indigenous intellectual property needs to be addressed on an institutional level, a governmental level, but just to meet this urgent need and try to avoid the division of different communities into who owns the knowledge and who doesn't, which is all based on a Western ethnocentric view of how to ascribe ownership and profits. We wanted to create a pathway for reciprocity that was more broad and more inclusive and doesn't require a direct line of ownership or between one compound and one group, tries to provoke maybe a deeper level of reciprocity that considers that everything that we depend on is acted from nature. And so we are obligated to give back in whatever way we can. And this is trying to do that in an impactful way.
Bia, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, I'm gonna add to Joe that he will have to dumb down a bit the message because it's very dense anthropology's presentation. I hope people get to understand. He brought a lot of really dense concepts. I mean, there's a million angles to this. Bottom line, we're shocked with the amount of money that is being poured into this field. We're really mind blown with the new people that joined the field and haven't even tried to psychedelics and are investing either a retreat or a clinic or a ketamine thing or a new psychedelic business. And we're here to say that we're not inventing the wheel, and we have to look back and we have to give back. And it's really revolting to see the contrast that while we're talking about cognitive liberty and how important it is for us to be able to self-program us and have healing, and why we're here obsessed with our mental health and the crisis of connection and all the loneliness and the epidemic of addiction, Indigenous people are still largely being murdered across the Americas. There is a current genocide going on under Bolsonaro. I am so ashamed to have that president in Brazil. It is grotesque. It is a backlash in time. Indigenous, like everything, you put a missionary, he's in charge of like isolated Indians. You put like a conservative moralist mother in charge of women affairs. What's happening in a country like Brazil is emblematic, but it's not unique. This is happening in Mexico and Peru and Colombia, in many places. So it doesn't even make sense for us to celebrate a kind of generic indigenous person, an icon of what, some indigenous wisdom and some indigenous ancestral knowledge, and how we are all grateful for indigenous people. Gotta work on that gratitude and put the money on We say in Brazil, you got a snake in your pocket, means like you're afraid to put your hands in your pockets. And puts our hands in our pockets, get the snake out of the pocket. It's not going to bite you. Get your money, give back, do something. Oh, it's not just about donating money. You can't just check. So I've been having multiple meetings with millionaires. It's not just about donating. I was like, how about start with donating? And then we can talk about, level 2. So we're doing that. It's organic for us. It's not like when Joe was 5 and I was 5, we said, oh, I want to, my dream is to do this. This is an organic thing. We did it because it's like an obligation, and we feel bad if we don't do something about it. It's not perfect. It's not 100%. There's a million things that people could sit and watch and find, things to improve. Yes, we're open for feedback, but that's what we did. That's what we figured out with our, joint love, our joint hearts, our joint genius brains of a real solid team of PhDs and people with a large history in the field, down in the ground, with publications, with field work, with firsthand experience. That's what we figured we would do. It's quite unique. It's quite pioneer. We're very proud of it. We're also scared of it. We're also needing to find out how to best conduct this. We need to fundraise for Joe's second half. His salary is guaranteed only until December. Joe is a golden resource, and I'm very proud to be here. And I hope everybody can donate. And I'm grateful for the space.
Thanks, Bia. Yeah, the concept that it's not enough to donate and that we should be doing more because we're able to construct intelligent business systems and models that can make for benefit corporate models or socially conscious, responsible businesses into the world. All of that is such a wonderful evolution of how business is being done. And I think you are shining light on an important potential shadow side of that, which is that the simple act of donating, simple act of sending some dollars over to a cause where those funds will be well used, they'll be stewarded by a team like yours to a very local and very vocal community that can truly benefit it's not a message that's shared as often these days. So I'm glad that you're still helping us all stay tethered to that form of philanthropy. And I want to thank you for this beautiful conversation. I also want to mention that Joseph was on the Psychedelic Therapy podcast that just published this week, and you did a wonderful job of sharing the full breadth of the mission and the intention and the philosophy behind this initiative. So for anyone in the audience who's interested in learning more, spending a little more time with the initiative and how it's making an impact in the world, the Psychedelic Therapy podcast is live on the podcast apps and Spotify and so forth, also on the mayahealth.com website. And Chacruna has a newsletter which encompasses not just the Indigenous Reciprocity Initiative, but many aspects of the perhaps invisible ties that we in the psychedelic community have to cultures and communities around the world. Bia, would you like to take a few moments to share more about the broader Chacruna mission?
Yeah, I want to invite everybody that we're doing a series that we consider as part of ERI. I mean, all these things are internal to us, make more sense maybe to us than others. For us, it's under the umbrella of ERI, but it's just technically another series of events, but it's called Patenting the Sacred. And we have done 3 so far, and they are all about IP and business models. One was a comparison with Ayurveda medicine and special legislation in India that has a section specially geared towards protecting indigenous rights. The other was a more generic one about alternatives to IP system. Recently, we had one in Mexico talking about psilocybin and bringing Oregon folks and a patent lawyer in conversation with indigenous and Mexicans about what's happening now. And we have 3 other ones geared, and this is going to be more like indigenous stuff, hardcore. So we're studying. I invite you to our study group. Chacruna is a study group. We're studying and we're doing a revolution. We don't understand reality. It's complex. So we decide to study. And by studying, we help to contagiate everybody to join our revolution. And we are into social justice and we are into transforming the world. But we're also keeping compassion and friendship and fun, because the social justice movement in the US is needing some Latin vibes and some more chill and loving and good humor touch to it, because it can get a little bit heavy over here. So we bring our, Latin and Brazilian love. We're very diverse, non-American centric team. We also do have wonderful, intelligent, brilliant white men such as Joe and many others that accompany us. We are into creating a good, team with different people that are aligned with this mission and this vision. And we're trying to make it happen in America. And it's been a great adventure. We're growing. And, we have a membership system if you want to participate. We have 400 and I didn't look today, but last time 404 members or something. And so we want to have more. We have thousands of members. We want to, create this dream together. And I'd love everybody to join in whatever capacity you can.
Thank you, Bia. Thank you for all of the work you've done. We've known each other for many years in this community, and I see how hard you work and what an uphill climb it is to do the work that you do. So I nod my hat to you and to your entire team. And I want to offer an opportunity, if there's anything on the tip of the tongue in the audience, any question that might not have been addressed yet, and a moment to ensure that everyone can share what's on their hearts and minds.
I think while we wait for, I just wanted to maybe give a final word on reciprocity, and just thank you, Bia, for that encouragement. And I just I feel always encouraged when I talk to Bia, and I think sometimes we get a little bit too doom and gloom when we are all working in the activist space on issues that we care. There's so much injustice that needs to be addressed, but we have to have a positive vision for the future. And I think one of the things that sets Erie apart maybe from other approaches is just the approach of trying to reach people on level and systemic level, and trying to be bottom up, community driven. And I just wanted to say something about a nation and about resources and trying to support Indigenous communities. I think one of the other lessons that I want to confer maybe, or that I'm also trying to integrate, is that you don't necessarily have to reach across the globe, that wherever you are right now is Indigenous land, and is there is an environment, a community of different beings, of different organisms around you that you can connect with, and you can learn the history of the land you're on. You could connect with the Indigenous cultures where you are, and you can try to address these things in your own life where you are as well. And that, you know, these injustices, these inequities can never really be righted adequately by the same systems that are now profiting from Indigenous knowledge. And so, you know, Erie provides a unique avenue for psychedelics enthusiasts to reciprocate with their environment and its Indigenous defenders, but it's also meant to be a bridge that builds lasting relationships. And this is a living and growing network. And part of what reciprocity means to me is just acknowledging my place in this ever-shifting story, in this world of interrelationship. And then from there, how do you move forward in solidarity, and how do you navigate it?
How do you navigate it? Poignant words. Yeah. with that question coming in, how do organizations in the Western world learn from Indigenous traditions and practices while honoring and respecting their needs and without crossing the boundary into extortion or extraction?
Sorry, David, are you reading questions somewhere? Because I can't see them.
Oh, I'm being sent them by our team at Maya here, who are fielding these questions.
Okay, got it. Can you repeat that? Sorry.
How do organizations in the Western world learn from Indigenous traditions and practices while honoring and respecting their needs and without crossing the boundary into extortion or extraction?
Well, I think that's kind of the question that everybody asks the whole time, no? I think people could already do a lot by not claiming to like be holders of Indigenous lineage or, to be like representing Indigenous people when they, in fact, are not Indigenous. So I think we have to look for legitimacy in our own terms, and people should be able to also find legitimacy in like hybrid, contemporary, mixed modalities, and not necessarily try to be Indigenous. I am not against people using Indigenous plants per se. I think there's space for diversity, and there's also a lot of mestizo and non-Indigenous use that is very old. But I go with Joe. I think learn about go local, learn about your local history, learn about the traditions of the lands, connect to the Indigenous people that are around you, read anthropology, learn a foreign language, want to understand different people, speak their language, go do your homework, register. You were in doubt, go take that Spanish class now, go learn some other language, go try to be less American centric and learn about other things, read cultural books, not just blogs on the internet, try to get some good quality information, and learn to listen. And when you go to any place, ask people what they think. Like you go to a retreat, try to create conversation with the participants. They're not servants, they are people. And you can ask them what they think. And sometimes just with a question, you get to know a lot just by asking people what their opinion is. So it's about listening. Imagine if it was with you, somebody come to you and start saying, oh, you should do this and that. And why don't you do this and that? No, you'd say, hey, but I'm already doing all of this. Why don't you listen what I have been doing and then learn with me? And then like people have this thing of wanting to help the other, but it's like for the other to tell us what they need help with. And so it's kind of basic. And for that, you need to be able to speak and communicate. And we have also a document.
It's basic, but it's been convoluted by so many economic and social forces that are at play between the different nations and territories and geographies. And it's a complex soup that you're in with your team. And I appreciate that you can still pay attention to what is basic. And by that, I mean, perhaps primal and natural and organic to us as a species and as a connected community. So that's a beautiful notion to close on. And I want to thank you again for sharing these concepts, sharing these thoughts. It's definitely a door opening and an invitation for everyone who's with us to learn more and to pay maybe a little bit of attention, if that's what feels right, to the topic of how we in this Western world, I speak for myself, and of course that can be abstracted to anyone in the audience, wherever you are. How do we have relationships with others on the planet, with their lineages, with their wisdom, with their needs and desires, while honoring our own needs and desires? And how do we do that in a wholesome way that comes from love, that comes from connectivity? And I really feel that your organization, and especially with this new initiative, you're offering a beacon to the community And I appreciate you both for that. I know that my whole team at Maya does, and we're very grateful to be in relationship with you. Is there anything either of you would like to share with the audience? I know that we've got the link for anyone to donate who hasn't yet, or to potentially share with friends after the event. Is there anything you would like to share as a closing comment?
Yeah, thank you, David. I wanted to just say one thing related to that question about organizations in the global north and our systems of organizations. I would encourage you to question how it's organized, what your business model is if you have a business, because part of the lesson of those alternative ontologies or different views of reality, and some of the evidence that we're becoming more aware of is showing that the intelligence in nature is something that isn't top down. It's a network that's decentralized, and the sort of ideas happen at the nodes in between, and there's no necessarily like one person in charge or one authority that imposes their will on everybody else, but recognizing that everyone involved is who is generating the value and the of whatever you're doing, and everyone you're working with is part of it. And so trying to make it maybe more democratic or more horizontal in organization might be one way to learn a lesson from the global south, or from nature, from those communities that are connected to nature. And I would also just say that if you want to stay in touch with IRRI, with the organizations involved in IRRI, do a series every Thursday. You provide updates and maybe photos and videos from the communities on the ground, showing how the donations are impacting them and their projects. We try to stay fresh in communication with everyone involved, and try to get with the Chacruna's community and the wider community. And we a podcast every Friday as well. That's just weekly news digest, Chacruna Dieta. So it's a living network.
Beautiful.
Joe is the star of the podcast, so you can have more of him if you want.
Wonderful. And we'll be sure to share the links to those to that show and to those references after this event. I want to thank everyone who stayed on as the conversation was alive, and we went longer than the planned time, and it's been beautiful to feel this container maintained. And thank you both for joining us and sharing the work you're doing. Thank you for the hard and often unspoken work that's being done by your team. And I hope that we start to see this conversation emerge in the Western world, in the medical world, in the mainstream, and in the media in a really powerful way, because with leaders like yourselves putting this effort in now, I know that there will be an opportunity for hearts and minds to open around reciprocity and all of the different nuances and definitions that encompasses. And I appreciate it. I'm very grateful we've had this conversation, and very grateful to everyone in the audience for your donations and for your attention, for spending time here.
Thanks, David. And I hope you can fly us to Denver. I'm Brazilian.